Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Trey Williamson, and on behalf of the University of Miami Alumni Association, I want to welcome you to the 2020 Audrey R. Finkelstein Endowed Lecture Series. I am especially excited to be your moderator today. Let me explain why. Audrey Finkelstein was especially passionate about lifelong learning. She wanted to be able to endow a lecture series so that would feature what was going on exactly on campus with the latest state-of-the-art research from our awesome faculty. And then also that would offer an opportunity to alumni and the community, both in Miami and everywhere else, to stay engaged with their university. So that's exactly what happened with me. I am very honored and proud to work with my family in our car dealership. But at the same time, I wanted to go experience more in terms of lifelong learning for myself. So I engaged with the University of Miami and ended up doing a wonderful part-time PhD program where I was able to focus on this exact topic of mindfulness. That gave me the opportunity to work with these two luminaries in the field, Dr. Amishi Jha and Professor Scott Rogers. They really have put the University of Miami on the map on this very, very important topic. In fact, what better time really than this crazy year for this topic to really come to the forefront. Lots of articles I'm sure you have mention mindfulness as one of the tools in our toolkit to be able to combat all of the problems with virtual learning and all of the things that have happened with this pandemic frog, right? So with that, I'd like to formally introduce our two speakers. First, we have Dr. Amishi Jha. She is Associate Professor in the Psychology Department, as well as Director of the Contemplative Neuroscience portion of Mindfulness Research and Practice Initiative. We call that UMindfulness. Her research focuses on the neuroscience of mindfulness, including the effects on faculties such as working memory, executive control, and resilience. She has a vast number of publications, one of which you can find in a recent publication of Mindful magazine, where she talks about the 10 ways that the brain tends to react in a time of volatility like we've been experiencing this year, and how mindfulness can actually meet that so that we can succeed and thrive even under these circumstances. She has a book coming out next September 2021, so we'll be on the lookout for that. After you hear from Amishi about the research and neuroscience angle of mindfulness, then we'll hear from Professor Scott Rogers, who works with Amishi on the research, but he's an expert in the teaching and practice of mindfulness. He is a lecturer in law in our law school, as well as a founder and director of the Mindfulness in Law program here at University of Miami, which was the first of its kind in the world, one of the first, and has been modeled by other law schools in the world as well, offering law as a strategy for students and future lawyers to better engage with their life. He's been at it at the University of Miami since 2004, helping to establish ongoing mindfulness training programs in the Wellness Center, the law school, of course, as well as Low Art Museum and libraries. He's taught mindfulness to all different kinds of categories of people, including athletes and children, educators, business leaders, firefighters, lawyers, parents, physicians, everyone. Obviously, lots of publications, 5 books. One of my favorites from a couple of years ago is The Elements of Mindfulness, an invitation to explore the nature of waking up to the present moment and staying awake. It's a very approachable book for all ages. So with that, I would love to invite Dr. Amishi Jha to share some of her insights from her research.
Thank you so much, Trey. It's my great honor and privilege to be here today and have this really fortunate opportunity to share the topic of mindfulness with all of you. And to begin, I just wanted to say, we really are in a national moment of sorrow, a collective moment of sorrow with 200,000 people that have lost their lives due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And this has really led to our collective feeling of a lot of things. And I'd like to share with you a little bit about what those things are. I know we all have our direct experience with them, and then how that relates to our work in my own laboratory tied to mindfulness. So I'll be sharing my slides here. So just to get us started, the way that I would describe this particular moment is actually through these four words: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And this is shorthanded as something called VUCA. Now, how does this relate to our pandemic timeframe right now? And really, how does this contribute to what we're calling pandemic brain fog? Well, think about volatility, for example, right? There's so many different ways in which we can think about volatility in this moment. For example, just the sudden uptick in the number of cases, or uncertainty, things like, should the kids be going back to school? Is it going to be okay when they come back home? There's so many things that really could maximize our feelings of uncertainty. Same thing with complexity. It could be as complex as, how exactly are we going to hold Thanksgiving over Zoom, or maneuvering ourselves to get back and forth from the grocery store safely. And of course, ambiguity. I mean, I think that's sort of the pervasive feeling that we all have right now, is there's a lot that we don't know. Should we be sanitizing our food or not? Point after point, we don't know. So all of these different features of the VUCA moment that we're having do actually end up dovetailing with the work that my lab has been doing for about the last 20 years or so on the topic of the brain's attention system. So just wanted to share a little bit about what that work is to frame the rest of our conversation, our short conversation today. My work is interested in understanding the brain's attention system, how it is that we're able to actually focus and notice and manage using this powerful brain system. And over the many years that we've been studying this system, we use technologies such as functional MRI, brainwave recordings. And what we've learned is that this is a very powerful system. We'll talk about some of its powers in a moment. But it's also quite fragile and vulnerable. And there are sort of three things that really do degrade attention. And those are listed on this slide: stress, poor mood, and threat. We could replace that with VUCA. Really, that's what we're talking about. And mindfulness training entered my laboratory's work really as a solution or a salve, a protective way to deal with these VUCA circumstances that we were beginning to learn are so incredibly harmful and debilitating to our attention system. So let's dig in a little bit. I wanted to first start out by saying there are so many different groups that experience VUCA, not just all of us right now. I never could have imagined in conducting this work that there would come a time when our collective human experience is of VUCA, all of us at the same moment. But that's really where we are right now. The groups that we study in my lab have more constrained periods of time where they're dealing with a lot of stress and strain. And in many cases, this uncertainty and volatility. Groups like students and athletes, firefighters and military service members. And I'll be able to tell you a little bit about the work we've been doing with those groups as we move forward here. Well, one group that we can actually dig into is the military service member context. And what I can tell you about this group is, as you can imagine, service members and even military families dealing with the preparatory period of heading to combat, as well as combat itself, can be quite VUCA promoting. And by the way, I wanted to just mention that our service members and their families are not only dealing with things like combat abroad, but right now they're playing an extremely important role in frontline support during the pandemic itself. But I wanted to mention what kind of work we do with these kind of groups, in particular service members. We have our service member participants come in, they get a battery of tests that actually evaluate their attention. We might do this with brainwave recording or simple experiments. We actually have then a period of time over which they would be doing something or not doing something. In many cases, what we're offering them, as shown in this middle slide up here, middle image, mindfulness training. And then at the end of some period of time, they'd come back and do another sort of quick test to see what happened. So the period of time over which we're evaluating them is typically a very high stress interval. It could be 4 weeks, 8 weeks of intensive demands that they're already undergoing, usually in the pre-deployment phase. So they're getting ready to go somewhere and they're getting intensive training. And it's during that interval that we're actually going to evaluate them. And what we find over and over again, not just in our military service member participants, but in all of these groups that we talked about, is that attention actually does significantly decline over this interval if we do nothing at all. If we just let them go through this period of time, their attention will become compromised. That's a kind of a wake-up call that this very important core brain system that we need for almost everything we do, whether it's making decisions, paying attention to the people around us, listening to the sound of my voice right now and understanding what I'm saying requires your attention. All of these very core functions require attention, and yet we're finding that over a high stress interval, it becomes compromised. So I wanted to just say that there are many ways we can think about attention. We can think about it, like I said, as a powerful system that's like a flashlight, and wherever we direct it, we can actually get more information. That flashlight can be directed toward the external environment, right? When we look around and sights and sounds become salient and prominent to us. We can also actually think of attention in a different way, a totally different way, which is more like the alerting symbol that I have up here. That's when we think about attention, sort of like if you're driving along the road and you see a flashing yellow light, right? It tells you, be aware, be alert. You may not know what's important or what's needed, but you know you need to have your attention ready in case something happens. Children run into the street or strange traffic pattern or construction. So this flashlight and this alerting are both two aspects of thinking about attention. And a third way we can think about attention is sort of like this image here, a juggler. The juggler's job, this is the brain's executive system, and just like the executive of a company, the juggler's job is to make sure all the balls stay in the air, that our goals and our behavior align. Now, all of these systems, the flashlight, the caution sign, the juggler, they all work together to allow us to engage in these very, very powerful aspects of paying attention. And most of the time, we do pretty well with that. We might feel a little overloaded every now and then. But before this 9-month or so interval that we've been in, this pandemic period of time, I would say it's sort of part of the ups and downs of life that we've all experienced. Now we might feel like the level of stress and challenge is sort of full throttle and very extreme. And this puts us in a situation where our attention systems, just like those soldiers I told you about a minute ago, our attention systems may become compromised and degraded. And I wanted to tell you what happens when the brain's attention system does this, when it becomes compromised. We experience things like depression and anxiety and ADD. What do I mean by that? Well, in something like depression, which happens to increase over high stress intervals, it's as if that flashlight of attention continues to get sort of shined upon negative or depressogenic thoughts. In some ways, it may feel like we can't kind of control where our attention is focused. It just keeps going toward content that can be very problematic and very negative. And it's natural to actually have these kinds of experiences as we worry, as we reflect on all the things that we actually don't get to experience right now over this pandemic period of time. Time with our loved ones, even just going for a stroll at the mall or shopping without any worry or concern. So depression is an issue. Anxiety ends up happening when that alerting system goes on hyper mode. Everything feels like a caution sign, and that can be very problematic and lead to disorders like anxiety. And finally, when we think about the juggler, the executive system, under stress, it can look more like ADD, where a lot of the balls drop, where goals and behavior are not aligned. So with all of this sort of bad news, you might be asking yourself, well, how do you connect the dots here? How do you understand how attention may be related to producing these sorts of things in the way that I just described? And one important thing to think about, one important way in this is the case, in which this is the case, is really to know that attention is part of a very powerful capacity that the human brain has, something I call mental time travel. So you don't need a virtual reality machine to time travel. You can actually just do it in your own mind seamlessly, and we do it all the time, right? We know we can productively rewind the mind to the past to reflect on what's happened before, or we can fast forward to really plan and think about the future. And this very useful skill of mental time travel, capacity of mental time travel, unfortunately can be used against us in some ways under these high stress moments. So under stressful circumstances, similar to the one that we're all experiencing right now, um, something else happens. It ends up that we, as a stressed mind, become a wandering mind. And now we're no longer just productively rewinding the mind to reflect on the past. Now, when we actually press rewind, we're ruminating and regretting. I would say at this moment, maybe even longing for things and familiarity of what we are used to with our lives. Or when we are mentally time traveling to the future, we're not just productively planning, we're actually catastrophizing and worrying because of the nature of the circumstances that we're all in. The point is that under stressful circumstances, the mind is not here, right? It's in the past or the future, and it's in those locations unproductively. It's almost hijacked there unwittingly. So I wanted to mention to you that if you're feeling this way right now, and you might be feeling like you're the only one experiencing it, you are absolutely not alone. We just are in the middle of a study in which we asked people how often they're having COVID-related intrusive thoughts, where their mind just goes to these places of thinking about some of these longing or sad feelings, or actually thinking about the future with worry. And we found something sort of unfortunate and unsurprising, but very, very strong in terms of its effects. We found that the greater number of COVID-related intrusions people had, the more their mind wandered to COVID-related worries, the more they had an experience of stress, the more symptoms of depression they experienced, more sleep disturbances, greater experience of loneliness, and a reduction in positive mood. So it is in your head, so to speak, meaning that it's happening in terms of what your brain is experiencing right now. These are very real effects, and they're quite powerful on the way we can feel. So you might be saying at this point, yeah, I understand. I get this. This is my experience right now. What the heck can I do about it? Well, that's what we're going to spend the rest of our time actually talking about. And this is where the lessons from my laboratory can be actually quite helpful. The work that Scott Rogers and I have been able to do together over the last decade that I've been at the University of Miami have been powerfully interested in understanding how we can offer mindfulness training to individuals, high stress, high demand individuals for whom it is unavoidable that they experience long-term stress. So that's where mindfulness comes in. Mindfulness is about keeping the button right on play so that we're experiencing the unfolding of our moment-to-moment lives. We're not wandering away. We're taking that flashlight and devoting it to what's happening right now. In some sense, we're reclaiming those capacities that we have that sometimes get frayed and fragmented. And what we've learned when we offer mindfulness training is that it's quite beneficial. Whereas the soldiers that we offered no training to declined over a high demand, high stress interval, those that received mindfulness training actually stayed steady. And even beyond that, those that took the training program and really devoted themselves to practicing actually improved their attention. Given how powerfully attention is related to things like our mood, our well-being, even our ability to fall asleep at night, it was very, very important to us to be able to find these beneficial effects. And a lot of our work right now is now moving in the direction to offer this more broadly to more people so that mindfulness training is accessible and available to as many people as possible who could benefit. And the good news is that really most of us can benefit, and most of us can begin right now if you actually don't already have a mindfulness practice. So I wanted to just mention quickly that there are many benefits of mindfulness training beyond the attentional benefits that I described. Of course, our work suggests that attention plays a big role in all of these benefits, benefits for the body, psychological health, the brain, changing the physical structure and functioning of the brain, as well as our relationships. And to really fulfill our vision and mission and support our passion for bringing mindfulness to a broader community, Scott Rogers and I actually started the You Mindfulness Initiative, and I was very pleased to have wonderful colleagues like Scott available, like Trey, for example, available to work with us, and many other faculty members. This is just a snapshot of what we've all been up to with You Mindfulness, and we'd love for you to join our efforts as we move forward, wanting to continue to grow our community. And I'm going to actually just end there, thanking you for your attention for this very quick presentation, and hand it over to my dear colleague, Scott Rogers, who's going to actually put this to the test. He's going to actually give us an opportunity to experience a mindfulness practice right now together. So Scott, it's all you.
Thank you, Amishi. And thank you, Amishi, for not just a wonderful presentation to get us going around this important topic with some insight and understanding of what's at play, but also for our many, many years of a meaningful and wonderful collaboration and friendship. Trey, thank you for your friendship over many years as well, and also for that thoughtful introduction. And hello, welcome everyone. How nice to be together, especially at these times. You know, Amishi just talked about the science of mindfulness, and she really zeroed in on attention. And she's devoted her life to attention. She's an attention researcher, and attention factors in fundamentally to the study and practice of mindfulness. Now, in a little bit, we'll do a mindfulness practice together. And when we do, we'll select as the object of our attention in that mindfulness practice the breath, although please know that you can always choose something else to be the object of attention. Attention factors in prominently. The object depends, but the breath tends to be a useful one. And there's some interesting relationships, similarities, I think fascinating similarities between this attentional capacity and the breath and breathing. You know, we just learned about the nature of the mind to wander. Attention wanders, it's its nature. And sometimes this serves us very well. Lets us get things done. We're doing what we need to do, and we're skilled and we have an expertise and we're learning along the way. But at times when that mental time traveling happens and we move into the past, largely unaware or caught up in the future, with a scattered attention or a flagging attention, it can be somewhat perilous. But at the same time, we actually have the capacity to commandeer, to deploy, to direct our attention intentionally, at least for a little bit, and to train that capacity. Now, the breath is somewhat similar. It's just doing what it's doing, and thank goodness for that, because if we were in charge of each breath we were taking, we probably wouldn't last very long. At the same time, during the day, when VUCA arises and takes hold in the ways that it does, the breathing can become shallow. The breathing can become choppy. There are times even when the breathing stops. You may have heard of email apnea, where we're just sort of like holding our breath. And this is the theme that runs through this, not aware that this is happening. And the toll it can take on our well-being, on our performance, even on our attention. So let's now turn to the breath and to attention and see how they come together. And importantly, we want to understand their constituent parts and the way that they work well together, because they each have their charms. You know, when we talk about de-stressing and finding calm during the time of COVID, it's important to remember and to draw upon this throughout the day, that we can deliberately breathe a little bit more slowly and effectuate on a relatively reliable basis a calmer, steadier state. Let's do this now as our sort of prelude to a mindfulness practice. As we breathe in, a little slower, a little deeper. Breathing out, a steady, comfortable exhalation. Breathing in. Breathing out. Breathing in. And breathing out. Now, you may feel a little bit more calm, a little bit more relaxed. There's reasons why the slower in breath and the slower, especially the slower out breath, but always comfortable for you, not too slow, just a little bit slower than it might otherwise be, can bring about, you can bring about a shift in that way that we're feeling in the moment. And you probably know this. And it's nice to be reminded of this. During the day, it can be very helpful to, and sometimes it can be helpful to schedule this in before a Zoom meeting or a meeting, perhaps even on the hour, to just have a reminder to take a few slower, deeper breaths to reset, to recharge. And in many ways, what we're not manufacturing, like, I got to slow down my breath. It's just that we get so amped up, so activated, so agitated, so busy, so excitedly busy sometimes, that the breathing is sort of taken along for the ride, and it can have a consequence. And so we're really helping to settle the breath, which also can help steady and settle our attention, which brings us to sort of a mindfulness practice. And when Amishi talked about the science of mindfulness with all of the sort of inspiring points and interesting observations of the nature of the mind, all of that flows out of the practicing of mindfulness, right? This is where the action is. This is the secret sauce. And so in many ways, if we have, and if we learn to develop, if we choose to, a regular mindfulness practice, and there's many forms it can take, we become the scientist of the experiment of our own health and well-being. So let's do a little mindfulness practice together and see how we'll build on what we've already begun to explore with the breath. And there's more. So we bring ourselves into a posture that's upright and steady, comfortable, at ease. As we lower or close our eyes, whichever you prefer, resting attention on the sensations of the body, sitting or reclining if you're laying down, as we breathe. Aware of the posture, from head to toe, side to side, belly to back. Aware of where your bottom makes contact with what's beneath you, perhaps where your back makes contact with what's behind you. Directing the flashlight of attention to the sensations arising in and around your hands and fingers. Attending to the sensations arising by the feet, where they make contact with our socks or shoes or the ground. As we begin this practice by coming to our senses. And we can take a few slower, deeper breaths, as that can be helpful for creating a slightly more steady state of body and mind, helps to stabilize attention. By breathing in a little bit more slowly, and you can use your own tempo, your own pacing, just a little bit more slowly on the in breath, a little bit more full in exhalation, but tempered, not rushed, as we exhale, breathing in, breathing out, in and out. And then allowing breathing to resume its natural pacing and rhythm, whatever that may be in this moment. For we're no longer interested in slowing down the breath or changing the breath or even changing how we're feeling, as much as we are interested in being attentive to and aware of what we're experiencing as we breathe. And so for the next few moments, attend to the sensations of this precious breath as it flows through the body. You can't do this wrong. You're here. You're breathing. You're aware. And because we know that the mind wanders, as is its nature, we just learned about the nature of the wandering mind. For this practice, we add on, or we're inclined to be attentive to something along with the sensations of the breath, which is when our mind has wandered away from its object, its chosen object, which for this practice is the breath, but it could be a person talking. It could be the thing you're reading. This is a very portable and transferable practice. And so for the next few moments, as we move towards the closing of this mindfulness practice, when you realize that your mind has wandered, when you have that moment of, that mindful realization, gently escort your attention back to the breath. Returning to the breath that flows through this body which moves with the breath. And when you're ready in the next moment or two with an awareness of doing so, lifting the gaze, opening the eyes. All right, so that was a mindfulness practice, a very fundamental and basic and helpful mindfulness practice. Your practice can start and end there and last a lifetime. What did we do? We began by realizing we're here. We brought our attention to the sensations of the body, which is here. These sensations are arising now. We slowed down the breath, optional. You don't have to be slowing down the breath to be aware of the breath, the sensations of the breath flowing through the body. Some people can't or choose not to. But it can be helpful if you find it to be for creating a little bit more calm and a steadier state. We then observed. Just rest your attention, notice, observe the object, the breath. And then when you notice your mind wandering, because it will, keep an eye out sort of for that wandering attention. Attention doesn't track itself. Something larger is able to observe and notice. And then we bring our attention back. There's an SNL skit from the early 1970s, I think 1974. It's with Gilda Radner and Dan Aykroyd. And they're fighting over this canister that you see in Dan Aykroyd's hand, which is a whip, which is he says it's a dessert topping, and he wants to put it on his parfait. And Gilda Radner, this is a bit dated, Gilda Radner wants to put it on her mop. She wants to wax the floor with it. He's saying it's a dessert topping. She's saying it's a floor wax. And as they're going back and forth in this way, Chevy Chase comes in behind them and says, hey, it's okay, everyone, calm down. New Shimmer is both a dessert topping and a floor wax. And in many ways, mindfulness is both a dessert topping and a floor wax. It has a calming, relaxing, refreshing, sweet quality at times. It also can help us cultivate greater resilience, to clear away the grime of confusion, to see things more clearly. And if we go into the practice of mindfulness thinking it's just a dessert topping, we will at times be perhaps frustrated because it's more. It's a way of seeing things more clearly. It's not changing how we're feeling, as taking a few slower breaths might help to bring a more relaxed state. It's being aware of what we're experiencing, which at times can be uncomfortable and unpleasant, like these times, and to, through practice, slowly be able to be a little bit more steady, a little bit more present in those very moments. There's an image that we'd like to share with you. It's called The Landscape of the Mind. We're going to close with this. And this is an image which, when we think about doing a mindfulness practice and we think about lowering or closing our eyes, we might say there's nothing going on. But in fact, there's a lot going on. The landscape of our minds is an extraordinary place. And when we do a mindfulness practice, we're really beginning to explore, to get to know, to remember the landscape of our mind. So running through this image, we have the freeway of flow, where there's focus. You see the flashlight. In this case, it's the headlights on the car that were our vehicle through this life. But at times we wander off, our attention wanders off, and oh, the places that we go. Just a little bit over that first hill, that first bridge, if we're not aware, if we don't see that or notice that that warning sign, rumination road, there's the past. And if we don't catch ourselves, we land in the river of regret. Do we know the river of regret? I do. But it's important, and it can be so useful to realize where we're going, realize where we are. Up a little bit further to the right, there's another road, and if we're not really paying attention as much, we might land in, and often do perhaps, the valley of fear, moving into the future, catastrophizing. The bottom right, we have the dungeon of doubt. The top, we have the roller coaster of emotion. These are all the places, or many of the places, that we go on a regular basis for a few moments or for longer periods of time. Take a moment and notice some of the places that you might go to from time to time. And oh, what a game changer it can be to be aware that we're there, as opposed to being lost in these places that we visit again and again. We close with this because mindfulness is about seeing things more clearly. It begins with ourselves, and when we realize where we are, by bringing our attention to our experience, when we shine the flashlight of our attention on the landscape of our mind, we bring about an extraordinary opportunity for ourselves to enrich our lives, for calm, for insight, for better caring for others, and for our growth as human beings. We hope that this exploration of the science of mindfulness, the nature of the mind, and the utility of mindfulness practices might be helpful to you. And we wish you well. And we're looking forward to the rest of our time together.
Scott, thank you so much. I love how you remind us about developing a personal practice. It can be fun. You bring your special brand of trademark humor to this, because I think some people are afraid of mindfulness, that it needs to be this very serious thing. We sit on a mountain and meditate. It's not. It can be an active, playful tool that we use in our toolkit to get through life. So thank both of you very much. I also want to thank our participants, our viewers, for bringing in questions to this. A lot of them are addressing the fact that we all are kind of living in a new normal this year, that the pandemic has produced a new normal for different kinds of people. Maybe it's involving working or studying from home. Amishi, maybe I can turn to you. I wonder if you can comment on how we might use mindfulness to address some of the features of this new normal.
I think that's a terrific topic, and one that's certainly relevant to all of us right now. I mean, all of this is new for everyone involved. I mean, I think the way that I think about it most broadly is to, first of all, begin by taking a mindful orientation toward the current moment. So what I mean by that is an accepting stance. We are in this moment. This is happening to us right now. And by doing that, and why I think that's so powerful, is that a lot of our attentional energy, a lot of our mental capacities, and actually our well-being all get degraded when we spin out into trying to create alternative realities that are not real, or resisting the moment that we're in. And so part of it is just understanding, yes, we are in this moment. This is our collective moment right now. But the other one is to actually take an effort. And I don't mean that in a kind of a strained way, but take some actual time, it doesn't take very much, to spend your time practicing mindfulness. And our research has suggested that as little as 12 minutes a day, 3 times a week, can be helpful. So that would mean doing a practice very similar to the one that Scott just guided us through. And to be clear, many ways when you hear focus on the breath, people think, oh, I know this. I used to do this when I was able to go to yoga classes, right? I mean, I'm able to sort of control my breathing in and hold it, maybe do nostril breathing, whatever it is. And I wanted to just mention that that is absolutely powerful, but that is actually not what we're talking about when we talk about mindfulness training. What we talk about when we talk about attention to the breath with mindfulness training is taking an observational stance. The breath just occurs and we're here to observe it. And that steadiness that it can provide, right? The breath will have an inhalation and exhalation, but we steady ourselves. So it's complementary to a lot of what happens in yoga, but it's actually quite different. And the reason I think it really helps us with the new normal is that we have to accept what's happening right now. And in fact, we need to do that while we're growing and regrowing these degraded capacities of attention, because the third sort of A, I guess it's accept, attend, and the third A would be act. We do need to continue living. People talk about pandemic fatigue, and it doesn't matter if you're fatigued. The virus doesn't care. You still need all of your resources to keep yourself safe and your loved ones safe. So that's a little bit about why I think mindfulness can be helpful as we deal with the new normal.
Beautiful. Anything to add, Scott?
I think Amishi said it very nicely.
What it triggers for me as well is being able to stay focused and having lots of things on our plate when we're perhaps working at home, and then we have our family life and all of that. That triggers a lot of people to ask about multitasking. Can you talk about mindfulness and multitasking a little bit, one of you? Amishi?
Okay, happy to. Yeah, actually, the first thing I'll say is that term multitasking is a myth. And maybe many of you have heard this already. What we do is not actually multitasking. Our attention, just think about that flashlight, is singular. We can't have our flashlight pointing in 5 different directions at once. So what we do instead of multitasking is actually something called task switching, right? We'll engage in something, pull our attention back, engage in something else. Maybe it'll get yanked over here. And that aspect of the brain's capacity to task switch is useful. We've got to do it in our lives. You do have to pay attention when somebody needs to, have the dog needs to be walked, and you might have a Zoom call. I mean, these are demands that we all have to realize are actually a part of our reality. But the other thing to know is that task switching tendency is the most energetically costly for the brain. And so if you do it more than you absolutely need to, you are spending down. You are actually using up the attentional fuel you have at a faster rate than you might need to. So I would just ask you to kind of keep that in your mind. And when there are moments where you don't need to multitask, please don't. Monotask instead. If there's a way you can shut down all your other windows and focus only on writing that email, do it. If it's possible to allow people to leave you alone for certain periods of time to get certain work done, and then obviously engage with them fully when you have to and want to, that's absolutely fine. But I think the main thing regarding multitasking and the pull that we all feel is to remember that it is costing us, and there are ways we can actually try to help ourselves by reducing its prevalence in our lives.
Makes perfect sense. I know you probably out there are also getting emails like I am about maybe taking this supplement or something like that. There are other tools out there. I've identified mindfulness as one of the tools that we can use during this time. Scott, I wonder if you could talk to like anything else that would be out there that would be kind of complementary or important for us to also examine as we're developing a mindfulness practice.
Sure, and it's an interesting question, and it's a reminder that there are many tools in our toolkit, or many tools that we can bring into our toolkit, or really rather realize are there. always have been there, and develop and cultivate. So sleep and exercise and being with people who are supportive and eating well, being attentive to a nutritious diet. These we know are pillars of our well-being. And when we have that going well, and stress, and for the reasons that Amishi spoke to, sometimes it calls for our attention remaining on task and remembering, I want to eat well, I'm going to do that today, I'm going to make that in the morning, I'm going to say no if somebody asks me for this, or I'm going to exercise and remember to get this done. And then VUCA hits, and then the best laid plans just sort of begin to fall away, and that can be a bit of a spiral. So those are and always have been fundamental. And in many ways, we can't go a day without eating something, sleeping a little bit, moving our bodies, interacting with people, at least in some form. So we can take those for granted and we can optimize those aspects of our life. And mindfulness is a little bit more subtle because our attention is here, our breath is here. We're actually focusing our attention and moving our attention and realizing when we wander away. We're actually engaged in a natural mindfulness, but it's so sort of subtle and seemingly invisible that we don't realize it. And so the mindfulness practices can be very helpful. And in the ways that I think you're presenting this question, they also can help us, that is by being a little steadier, a little bit more at ease, a little bit more resilient in those moments. Even multitasking is a moment where our resilience is being called into question because we're feeling an anxious pull or a tug that if we were more aware of it, and the floor wax were sort of shining a little bit more brightly, we'd see through it and perhaps realize it's not as necessary as we might feel it is or have thoughts, and be able to bring our attention back. So practicing mindfulness and cultivating a more steady state and a way of seeing things more clearly may actually allow our intentions to eat the way we would like to eat, our intentions to get a certain amount of sleep, our intention to create time for constructive relationships with others, our intention to move and to be able to do these things, not with perfection, but a little bit more than we might otherwise, allows them all to flow together in a very supportive way.
I know there's a lot of attention on sleep out there because sleep has been compromised. So it's good to remind ourselves that mindfulness benefits both from healthy sleep and is a tool that we can use to get better sleep, right?
Nice.
Actually, so perfectly on that, maybe I'll move to Amishi. People here might be inspired. Maybe they already have a little mindfulness practice or they start to build one inspired by this talk. Maybe they want to incorporate it as well into their life by kind of bringing it into their workplace or sharing with their colleagues or family. Amishi, I wonder if you could speak about kind of some tips about how to incorporate this into our daily lives.
Yeah, I think that's sort of where the rubber meets the road, right?
Yeah.
And to say just broadly that, we've been using this term mindfulness, and I noticed in the chat that we're getting some comments regarding this. Just want to make clear that we're using the term mindfulness to describe a sort of a mental mode, a way of making the mind. And I think what Scott just described for us is how we can bring that mode, that sort of observational stance, to everything we do. So in some sense, it's sort of ingrained and it can become sort of imbued, not ingrained, but imbued in our experience. But there is also a formal practice part of this, something we'd call mindfulness meditation. So some of the things coming up in the chat are, is this actually the same as meditation? And I would say, really what we're talking about with mindfulness meditation is one form of meditation. And just so you know how I think about meditation from sort of a brain science point of view, it really is sort of an umbrella term like sports. When I say sports, you kind of get some image in your mind, but gymnastics is very different than golf. And the same thing goes for meditation. There are many different kinds of meditation. There's, sort of contemplative or wisdom traditions throughout the world. There could be Christian contemplative prayer or Judaic prayer, many other forms, Buddhist meditation, etc. And they also have very specific sort of training regimes. So compassion meditation, for example, is about really cultivating qualities of mind to reduce the suffering of other people, to have concern for that suffering. And mindfulness meditation, we'd say, is about paying attention to our present moment experience. So it's a training program as well as a mental mode. So just to kind of clarify that, and I think what Trey, you're asking about, bringing it to our very real lives, incorporating it into the workplace context, the teaching context, and in a moment, I want you to actually tell us how you bring it in to the teaching context. But just from a research point of view, I'll tell you that the key in all of this is that we don't think of this as some knowledge we're gaining. Like, oh, I learned about mindfulness today, I'm more mindful. It will do absolutely, really not much at all to just understand it as a concept. We really want to think about it more like physical exercise and physical training. You've got to do it, or as my sports psychology colleagues say, you've got to work it for it to work. And so the key is make a commitment. Now, the mindfulness of breathing practice, the one that Scott led us through, we're actually going to be providing a recording of a mindfulness practice for everybody that's listening right now, right? So they'll get that as a follow-up. And there's many other mindfulness resources that we can provide people through the U Mindfulness Initiative. They just go to mindfulness.miami.edu. They can learn more about that. But in terms of incorporating into our daily lives, I'd say the first and foremost thing is figure out a way to yoke it to something you do every day. Whether it's deciding to do it first thing when you wake up in the morning, maybe right after you brush your teeth, maybe right after a shower, whatever it is. And then whatever it is that this amount of time that you think you're going to be able to practice, cut that in half as your requirement. Let's say I'm going to commit gung-ho. I'm going to do an hour a day. I'd say start with a minute. And I think these are ways to get the ball rolling, to start setting up the habit of doing it. And then you can grow the number. Like I said, the sweet spot from our research looks like it's about 12 to 15 minutes a day, done sort of in a continuous fashion, about 3 or more times a week. But Trey, I'd like to just throw it back to you and ask you, ask somebody who actually teaches about mindfulness and incorporates it. What do you do in your own classes?
It's interesting because I started teaching part-time 10 years ago. And I find that, like with almost everything, people respond to something based on how you present it. So 10 years ago, I would kind of say to my students, there's this thing out there, it's doing a lot of great stuff. And I don't know if you're going to think it's kind of weird or something like that. And so then they were kind of like, oh, okay. But now, it is so pervasive. It's so everywhere. It's so universally understood as a legit mainstream technique that when I present it to my students or the people in my dealership, for example, people really do perk up and they want to learn because they see that there are benefits on the other side of this. And actually, so that's a perfect lead in. Thank you for maybe one last question to you, Scott. Maybe there's, as we're on our way to developing 12 to 15 minute practice 3 days a week, as Amishi said, there's probably also some like little informal practices that we probably can sort of like try to incorporate and remember, just as a little anchor or a reminder that we can access that place of quiet stillness when we want.
Yeah, that's nice. It's a good question, to access that place of quiet stillness and to access that place that can be aware of the moments that don't have a quiet stillness. But by being aware, as opposed to lost in that state, be liberated or freed in some way from the trappings of this curious, wonderful, and at times tricky attention. So yeah, a popular practice that many find useful that really which offers us a good insight as well, is called stop. You can have a little post-it that has a stop, or when you're driving your car or being driven and you get to a stop sign, it's sort of like, it's a sign, stop. And the instruction is really an acronym, which is to S, stop, or settle down, or sit, or stand even. There's no particular position. To T, take a breath. But what we've explored today is we're always taking breaths, so that's not new. What is new? Well, we're taking a breath aware of the breath we're taking. Now, we might choose to slow it down because we're realizing we're a little anxious, but as Mishi said, fundamental is whether we're slowing it down or not, can we be aware of the breath we're taking? And sometimes that awareness of a shallow breath shifts our physiological state because we brought awareness to it. So we stop, we take a breath, aware of the breath we're taking, or several breaths. We observe. So we observe our experience. And it could be looking out around us and going, oh my gosh, look at that sky, look at that sunset. Where was I lost in my mind a few moments ago in some conversation that's long gone or may never even happen? Or observe the sensations in the body, or observe the nature of the mind in that moment. And then to proceed and to continue driving on, or if you were walking, you did that practice, you might stop for a moment and then continue on. Or if you have it by your phone or by your computer during a Zoom meeting, you maybe practice it in the middle of the meeting when you get a little antsy, or just when you're feeling a little bit, more of this or more of this. I'm excited, but there's more to be able to bring that short practice in. And what's nice and what's important about that practice is it's really just a shortened version of the longer practice. That can be 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes to sit or stand or stop, take a breath, breathe with awareness of our breathing, observe our experience, and then continue on.
I love it. For what I find is that it takes a reminder sometimes. So every time I see a stop sign, that's beautiful. I try to remind myself every time I hit an elevator button. You know, you've got a minute or two before the elevator comes. Reminder, deep breath, conscious breath. So thank you so much for the takeaway tips and the insights and education. For everyone listening, you will get an email with access to the recording of this event, as well as a beautiful 10-minute mindfulness practice that was created by Scott Rogers with scenes of a video that you can download that has scenes of the Coral Gables campus. So this will be a great way to incorporate mindfulness into your daily life. We're also always available, mindfulness.miami.edu. The U Mindfulness Initiative is a great way to learn more about what's going on all over campus. Like I said, University of Miami is really on the map for this. It's a big deal. And it's not just in law and psychology, but also in the business school, in art and architecture and music, medicine, nursing. So I'm very proud of that involvement. And so with that, on behalf of the Alumni Association, I thank our tremendous speakers. I thank all of you for attending. I think Audrey Finkelstein would be very proud of the continuous learning that we're all still trying to do. Please continue to engage with your you as you continue to learn and grow. It honors us all. So with that, thank you and go Canes.